In the late 90s, there was a very cool handheld console that never made it beyond the shores of Japan. It came from a company called Bandai, famously known in the late 90s for their Tamagotchi line of toys. This console is called the WonderSwan, and much like the Game Boy, the WonderSwan utilized a non-backlit display which required an external light source to be visible. And if you're a regular of the channel, you know I like my retro handheld consoles to be backlit. So today, we're going to do just that to this WonderSwan Color. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today we're going to be looking at this beautiful translucent orange WonderSwan Color and a really amazing IPS kit that will drastically improve its playability. Now this is a console that I've always known about but never actually owned until just a little while ago. And as I put my hands on it for the first time, I absolutely fell in love with it. It has a really fantastic feel and it's much smaller and thinner than I had imagined. Overall, I am really digging the form factor. If you're a fan of the WonderSwan, or maybe you've never heard of it before, hit that like button and let me know what you think about this somewhat obscure handheld console in the comments section below. Now, of course, there are some unique things about this console, such as the dedicated battery caddy, and the fact that you can play it in both landscape and portrait mode depending on the game. And it was also designed by none other than Gunpei Yokoi. He's the guy that designed the original Game Boy DMG. How cool is that? Also noteworthy, this console was never released outside of Japan, so all the games that actually came out for it are understandably in Japanese. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't get one. There are quite a few games that you can play that are somewhat English friendly. The website videogamekraken.com has a great list of games that are playable for non-Japanese speakers. I'll leave a link to that website in the description below. Now, besides an entire library of games that's in Japanese, there's another issue with the WonderSwan, but it's something that we can actually address. As you can see, the WonderSwan has a non-backlit display very much like the Game Boy Color. Thankfully, there is a kit specifically designed to fix this. I purchased it from eBay for around $50 US. Apparently, they are also sold on AliExpress, which is a good alternative since it seems to come in and out of stock periodically on eBay. So let's see what comes included with this kit. Then I'll show you how to install it. And lastly, I'll go over its features, its pros and cons, as well as my overall thoughts. Oh, and we're going to do a quick battery test as well with the new IPS installed, because as you can see, it runs on a single AA battery, which isn't very much at all. So be sure to stay tuned all the way to the end of the video for the battery test because I think it'll be pretty interesting to see. Okay, so taking a look at the packaging, we can see that this kit thankfully came well protected in this hard shell case, which is good because mine came all the way from China. Now the first thing we have here is the IPS panel itself. Nothing we haven't seen before, but it does appear to be a model we haven't used in any of my other videos. So it seems to be unique to this kit only. Next is the driver board. This of course allows the WonderSwan to be compatible with the new IPS panel. It also has two touch sensors already attached to it. One sensor controls the color palette, while the other controls the screen brightness. I'm assuming that since the WonderSwan Color is backwards compatible with the original WonderSwan games, which are black and white, that is what the color palette option is for. The kit also comes with two wires, which will be used to tap power from the WonderSwan console in order to power the IPS panel. This flex cable will be used to connect the driver board to the WonderSwan, and these two pieces of insulating film will be used to make sure nothing shorts out. The kit also comes with double-sided tape, but of course I'm not planning to use it. Now, the WonderSwan uses Torx screws instead of traditional Phillips or even tri-wing ones, so thankfully they also included a Torx driver. I won't be using it since I have my trusty iFixit screwdriver set, but it's great that they included it anyway. And lastly, it comes with a really nice glass screen lens. However, I don't think I'll be using it since it appears to be a different color scheme than my orange console. Great, so that's everything included in this kit. Now let's go ahead and get this thing installed. Getting inside the WonderSwan is actually pretty easy. Simply remove the 6 T7 Torx screws as well as the battery caddy. With those removed, you can gently lift off the rear shell housing, exposing the motherboard. Now you can delatch and remove the LCD ribbon cable. This is very much like the Game Boy Color. And now you can lift out the motherboard. The buttons are actually attached to the membranes and are removed as a single unit. Now peel off the 4 foam spacers. I used a heat gun to soften the adhesive to make them easier to remove. Next, take this opportunity to use some IPA and clean any glue residue the foam pads left behind, as well as the button contacts. Now pre-tin the ground lead so we can solder one of the included wires to it. And then do the same to the positive lead shown here. Go ahead and feed the negative wire through this hole to the front of the motherboard. Then fold the other positive wire to the front as well. Now pre-tin the ground and battery pads on the IPS driver board. Solder the ground wire to the pad labeled ground and the positive wire to the pad labeled battery. Once completed, apply the insulating film to the motherboard as shown. Then insert the ribbon cable with the blue side facing up, then latch it in. Now let's remove the old LCD. Be careful since the adhesive holding it down is actually pretty strong. Just take your time and go slow. Now I removed the old adhesive, but you may want to keep it to help hold the new IPS screen in place. Apply the second insulating film to the rear of the IPS panel. Then insert the ribbon cable to the driver board as shown. Peel off the protective film and set the IPS panel in place, making sure to align it to the bottom left corner shown here. I then used some Kapton tape to keep the driver board adhered to the back of the IPS panel. You can now reinstall the buttons. And then carefully apply the touch sensors to the inner shell housing. I placed them as far left, closest to the speaker as possible, so that they're out of the way from accidental presses. Then insert the ribbon cable into the motherboard with the contacts facing up. Now, this part is a little tricky. You need to bend and fold the cable in such a way that it's flat, and you need to tuck any excess cable between the motherboard and IPS driver board. Once the ribbon cable is all set, go ahead and reinstall the rear shell housing. After making sure none of the cables are being pinched and everything looks okay, fasten all 6 Torx screws to button up the console. And then turn it on for a quick test. Fantastic. Okay, I'm really digging how this came out. As expected, this is infinitely better to play on now that it's backlit. The colors are bright and vibrant, and the overall image quality is fantastic. With this new IPS mod, I'm actually really motivated to get a bunch of games now. So if any of you have any recommendations, please let me know in the comments section below. Alright, now I'm going to go through some of the key features of this kit. First and foremost, the screen size is pretty much exactly that of the original, which is just awesome. And based on what I've read and what I'm seeing with the little bit I've interacted with the console, the picture is integer scaled. I didn't notice any shimmering effect at all. This kit also retains the information status bar on the right side of the screen. I've seen reviews of older backlight kits that did not display the status bar, so I'm happy that this one actually includes it. Of course, the brightness can be controlled by tapping the touch sensor. It appears to have 10 levels of brightness. You can also switch the color palette as well. This will most likely be useful for original WonderSwan games since those were black and white. It's not really useful at all for the WonderSwan Color games. So those are the main features of this kit. Now let's go over some of the pros and cons that I've noticed. Starting with the pros, this kit does not require any cutting of the shell to install, which is something that I always look for in a mod kit. This means it is completely reversible, which is something that I always consider when doing a mod. Typically, if cutting is required, I like to get an aftermarket shell, and thankfully that's not the case with this mod kit. Of course, being backlit is another pro, but really that goes without saying because that's why we did it in the first place. And as I mentioned previously, this kit appears to be properly integer scaled and it retains the status bar. Now onto the cons. Now these are more of nitpicks, but first thing, I wish that these kits would include an aligning bracket. The IPS panel nearly fits perfectly, however there is still a little bit of play and an aligning bracket would easily fix this. The next con is the fact that this isn't really a drop-in solution. Now, don't get me wrong, if you have some soldering experience, I think this is a very doable and accessible mod for a lot of people. It's probably not possible to make this a drop-in solution due to the power requirements of the IPS screen. And really, the last con is that it doesn't come with a custom ribbon cable. As you saw in the installation, I had to bend and fold the ribbon cable into odd angles, and it actually makes the kit a little bit thicker than it needs to be. So those are the cons, and again, these were mostly nitpicks, but I do think there is still room for improvement. And now, the moment you've probably all been waiting for, the battery test. Depending on how well it does, I may consider it a pro or a con. Now remember, the stated battery life for an unmodified WonderSwan Color is supposed to be roughly around 20 hours, so that's the figure I'll be comparing it against. Wow, so I think that was pretty much what I expected. I mean, the WonderSwan unfortunately only has one AA battery, so given that huge restriction, I think it's hard to make it a con, but at the same time, it's most certainly not a pro. I'm actually curious about what you guys think. Given all the benefits of this kit, is it worth the drastic cut in battery life? Overall, how do you feel about the WonderSwan Color, and do you think you'll be in the market for one? As always, I'm eager to read your comments, and I try to respond to every single one, so definitely leave me one in the comments section below. I hope you did enjoy the video. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Macho Nacho Productions. I release content every Thursday, so be sure to turn on notifications. And as always, see you next time.